Hello and welcome back to a new video in my C++ library series. Now in this video series we're going to explore a new C++ library every week. Now in today's week we're going to explore the library SQLite C++, or better to say SQLite in general. Now what this library is doing, it is wrapping SQLite in a C++ API, and SQLite itself is a relational database that can be hosted in one single file. And that's what we want to use. Well, why do we want to use it? Well, because databases are nice. Many times, especially if you're writing business application, you need to have a way to store a large amount of data. So for example, if you're writing a calendar application, you need to store all the contacts, the birthdays of the people, the other appointments that you have, and it's all going to be required to be stored somewhere. And what you can do, especially if you're writing a desktop application that just runs on a single system, it does not need to be kind of like shared over the network, is you can use SQLite to have like one file that contains all the data in here. You can run queries on that file, you can run indices, have multiple data managed by that one single file, and this is what SQLite is doing. It's basically a database in a file, and you just need a library, or in this case too, SQLite and the wrapper to C++. Now, that's what we want to do in this video. Now, why are we going to use the wrapper? Well, because the API of that wrapper is really nice, and we do not need to deal with the complicated API of SQLite itself, and it has some nice bindings in here. That's just the way why I use the API. Now, for SQLite development, I recommend that you also download something called SQLite Browser. SQLite Browser is a very simple application, or it's called DB Browser for SQLite, but no matter, it's a very nice application that you can download here on Windows as an installer for 64-bit. And this application helps you to debug your data and debug your SQL. Now, it basically is a front end that allows you to view your database files in a visual application instead of the application. Now, installing it, just select desktop and program menu, whatever you like for SQLite, and then install it. And then you are ready to use it. It's just a front end so that we can later on verify that our database is actually working and integrated properly. All right, let's accept and let's install. All right, now the SQLite is ready. We want to actually now use the library. How do we use the library? We use Conan with that token here. Now I already prepared a moxpp template. Moxpp is my personal starting point for writing Conan and Premake 5 application. It's a ready-to-use template that you can use for free. It's used very easily. You go to your Conan file, you replace the dependencies that come by default with your dependencies. Now we just need this SQLite CPP. Now what we also want to do is we want to change a few other parameters here. In mox.lua we change the name of the solution to SQLite example. And what I also want to do is I change the project name by going into source build.lua and changing here the name to SQLite example as well. Now these are all the things that we need to adapt, and then if we are ready we can run the project by calling mox-init, which is generating all the required data, installing all the dependencies. Ignore the warnings, this is just because Kernel 2 recently released. Now, as soon as this has run, we can find an SQLite example.sl in here that we can open. And that's going to contain our ready-to-use project with SQLite 3 and the C++ bindings. Alright, so now we can open up our main and start coding. Now, before we're going to get coding with the application, I want to quickly provide a bit of a framework that we can use, because in today's video library example, we're actually going to write something useful, because just having done plain SQL queries is not good. I want to have a quick application that supports user input, and you're always going to have a command, and you're always going to have a parameter. So what we want to do is we want to have something command, and we're gonna have, instead of the command, an std string cmd and a argument string. Let's include string here so that we have it as available as there. And this is basically a command that I want to do. And let's write a void or command get function, and get is gonna do std getLine for stdcn, and then we're going to put this into a line, std string line, then we can basically read that one single line here. And what I want to do is I want to quickly check the space position. The space position is basically calling find first off. I want to find the first space, and if space not equal std string npos, then we have an argument at the line, and then I want to basically say command cmd dot argument no dot comment equals line substring at 0, and then I think it's a space -1, and then the argument should be line substring space +1, and then we should have left 1 out, I think, if I am not mistaken, and this should be everything that we need. Now let's return CMD here. In the case we do have another CMD, it's gonna be basically return command with the line and no argument, and then we are good. Now what I want to do is while true loop, and then I want to have a const command cmd equals get, so that we have a command. And then I want to basically switch on cmd, but this doesn't work. I think we shouldn't be able to switch on that string. We need to do an if command, and I want to quickly check for exit where I want to break, so that I have a bit of command parsing. Command parsing and what I want to do is I want to be able to manage a to-do list in our application that we're going to connect to SQLite. So we're going to have multiple operations. We're going to have a command add with the to-do. And what I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to check if I want to add something to my to-do list. Then what we're going to have is we're going to have something that can be called to mark a to-do as done. And done is going to take an ID of that to-do that's going to be used, an identifier. And the identifier is going to be something that's going to be returned. It's going to be a number probably. And yeah, let's see how we're going to do this with the identifier. It's going to be a number, probably. Now, of course, we should do it with else if, so that we are not going to go into too deep of a details in here, but there is no else required. Now, done should be possible, but I also want to have a command called list with no arguments. List is gonna basically be responsible for showing all of my commands, basically show all the open ones and the closed ones. And then I want to have a command open, and open is gonna show me all yeah, kind of like to-dos that are not done. So I can kind of like say add to add something, say done to close something, and then I can say list to show all, and open to show all open to-do elements. And this is something that I now want to integrate with my database. Now first we need to include it, so SQLite is the folder where all the source code is contained, and what we want to include is database. This is the very basic usage to open up a database. Now how do we open that? SQLite is the namespace, and then what we want to have is a database called DB, and the database requires a database name or a database file name, and then it requires some flags. Now by default it opens up the database as a read-only database, so what we need to specify is SQLite open read write. Read write is required to read and write the database. And I think we shall also combine this with SQLite open create, so that the database also gets created. Now let's provide the path. I want to go to the local one and call it one todos.db. So todos.db is where the data is going to be stored. Now the database should be automatically destroyed by calling the destructor. So that's everything that we need to do to open up a database. Let's make like a breakpoint and see what we got. If we got any exceptions, then we might throw, or let's see what we got. So we got our breakpoint, and you can see that there's a file name in here, and there's some data in here, a pointer that's containing some data, so that looks legit. And if I would inspect my working directory is here the application application directory, you can see that we have a todos.db, which is the database that has been created. You can see it's currently empty because there's nothing in here. But if our application terminates with exit, then there might be already some like data attached to it. No, it's still empty. So it seems like SQLite is keeping it empty. All right, so let's get started by setting up our database. Now, the first thing that we need to do in our database is we need to create a table. Now, we can execute a SQL query by calling the execute function on the SQL database. Now, how to know to do your SQL, where there's an SQLite documentation, and I'm looking for the create table statement, so I can take a look at that. Create table if not exists is the one that I'm looking for, so create table if not exists. So if the table does not exist, I want to create a table. There is a table name that I want to provide, and then I can provide the so-called column defs. So I want to have a name, to do, or to-dos, let's keep it plural. And then I want to have the column defs. What are column defs? These are how columns are defined. They are defined by a column name and a type name, and then type constraints. So column name is kind of like what we want to do. I want to have an ID, and then we need the type. So these are the types that are available: null, integer, real, text, and blob. These are kind of like the most basic types. I want to get started with an integer, right? This is an integer. So the identification. Then what I want to have as next one is I want to have the actual content. So the text of it. So let's call it content and then text. Then the next parameter is going to be an integer as well. And this is going to show if it is done. So done, integer. Now, these types can be even more specified. Actually, if you take a look at that, you can see that we have multiple type names that are possible. There's actually a tiny int that we can specify. I want to have a tiny int here. The tiny int needs in the brackets the size. So tiny int 1 means that it's a 1, like the smallest integer. I think it's on the byte, so that we can specify on how it works. Now, what we can do is we can also provide some auto increment in the database. So what we provide is the primary key auto increment to basically create that database scheme that we want to have, and everything else is exactly okay. Let's run this and see if we get our table, and it is now where we gotta then consider our SQL Explorer. So you can actually see that we can over that statement. If it would have been faulty, we would have gotten an exception. So what I can do is I can continue, I can exit out, and now the database has been created at the Visual Studio Code. You can now see that there's also data in here. Now, to see that everything works, we can open up DB Browser. DB Browser helps us to get insights on the database. I can say open database. Now I need to browse where my database is. Let's copy the path here and let's paste it in here. I think I cannot directly put it in here. There, todo.db. And if I open the database up here in the application, you can see that we have our to-dos in here. We have an ID here where you can see that it's an auto increment statement is still in here. You can see the primary key icon. You can see that we have content that we have done in here. And if we would have go to browse here, you can see that we can actually insert a row here, like an ID1, and then have a content like my to do. And then I can hit apply, and it's done. I can provide 0 because it is not done yet, and then I have kind of like a basic to-do element already in here. Now, of course, having it in here is not sufficient. We want to, of course, get this from our C++ application. Let's start by writing the list function, which shall list everything onto our console. Now, how do we list something? Well, we need to provide a statement. So what I can do is I can create myself a statement. In this case, it's called list all. The statement needs a database to bind on and a query string. So select star, or in our case, we want to have the ID. Now we want to have everything, all right? No, we don't want to have everything. We just want to have the ID and the content from that, so that we can provide the ID and the content of the to-do list. Or we might even not want to provide ID, but we need the ID to kind of like mark something as done. So I also want to do that. So select ID and content from to-dos. So that's kind of like the statement. We want to select everything, ID and content from to-dos. Now what we can do is we can execute the statement. So wire list all dot execute step, which basically executes one step at a time, and then I can stdc out my to-do list, my element. So list all has columns attached to it. So get column is going to get me the column with a certain name. In this case, I want to get the ID, and then I want to convert this to an integer. So get int, so I can kind of like do it like that. And then I want to have the content of it. So list all, get column, no, get column, content, get string to get a string from it, and then I see the envel to get a new line. And then I basically print everything in here. That's a way of doing it. And if I would now, for example, consider that implementation, and I would enter list, I should get like all the data that's inside of the database. Here, I know I have a breakpoint in here. Let's remove the breakpoint in here. If I would now go in, and maybe I haven't written the changes here. I need to write the changes in the DB browser for SQLite. I need to write these, or it doesn't work. Now, it is not a problem that our application is currently running. SQLite is actually capable of handling multiple read and write simultaneously to the database. However, I would not recommend it. However, you can see that I can list my to-do, and if I would, of course, change it in here, like my to-do, if I would apply this here and write this to the database, and I would type in list OK, again, you can see that it's actually dynamically changing. So we are actually considering the data live from the database here. No, by the way. So I also want to be able to list everything that's done. So not only these. So I also want to listen what is open. Sorry, what is open. So list all and list open is what I want to concern. List open is not as simple. We need to do a bit of more querying. We want to say where, and we want to check the done. So where done equals 0 is what we want to do. And then while list open execute step. So as long as we are finding data here, we're gonna basically do the same thing that we had previously in there, but not with list all, with list open now. So that's everything, I think. Okay, so now we should be able to list everything and to list all the open steps. If I do it like that, it shouldn't really change anything with the current implementation that we have going. If I say open, we get it all, and if I say list, we get also all. However, if I mark that one as done, so I'm providing a 1 in here, apply the changes and write the changes. If I now say list, I get everything again, but if I type in open, I get nothing, because there's no open to do inside of my list. Now, what we now want to do is we want to mark something as done. This is also quite simple to do. What we want to do is exit out, and then I want to mark it as done. How can I mark something as done? Well, I need a statement again, so SQLite statement, mark done. So update to-dos, set done equals 1, where ID equals, and now we need a parameter. Parameter can be named with columns. So column ID basically creates a name parameter ID, and that parameter needs to be set. So mark done bind is the function. So I want to bind a value to the statement. I want to convert R to E, so string to integer. The string that I want to convert is the command arguments C string. So convert the string to an integer and bind it to the column named ID. So ID is kind of like here the name that we can use then there with the column as well. So I want to bind these values together. This is something called a prepared statement. This is how we should always do it. And as soon as all value are as bind, you can execute the statement. In this case, I'm not requesting any data, so I can directly call the execute function here to execute this without executing a step. So that's kind of like the idea of the library, without and with return value. So done, yeah, just like that. Update to do set done where ID. That's basically the idea. Now, what I also want to do is I want to be able to add something on top. This is also very simple. SQLite statement, add new, DB, insert into to-dos. I think we want to provide the content and done, and the values are going to be content and 0 because by default nothing is done, and then add new. I want to bind something on there. I want to bind to content, and I want to bind from cmd arg.cstring, so the argument. And then I also want to do a plain execute. And that's basically all the features that we want to have in our small, simple database demo application. So this should now allow us to modify our database, our to-do list. So I can add hello world to the database. If I now list it, we don't get it. Okay, probably my comment line, my comment parsing doesn't work. Let me quickly see what we're going to get out of that. So yeah, I have not read enough of this. I need to read until the space. Yeah. Okay, that's something that I have mistakenly done wrong. Of course, it's always not the database that I want to show. Haha. But now it should work. Add hello world. And it should have been added. If I go to list, now we have the hello world in here. If I say open, so all open to-do list, it's hello world. And if I say done at 2, list should give me everything, but open should give me nothing because I've basically marked this as finished. So do YouTube video on SQLite. And then if I look at my open tasks, I see this is open. And then I say my task 3 is done. So I list all of them. These were all of my tasks and none of them is open. So I can exit out. That's kind of like the idea of the SQLite database. If I refresh here, I'm of course going to get all my tasks in the SQLite Explorer here as well. And everything is good. Alright, so that's everything that I wanted to talk about the SQLite, and this should give you a good idea on how you can use SQLite with execute, step, and statements. This was just a very quick crash course on that library. I will recommend using SQLite if you're having complicated project files. Do it with databases if it doesn't need to be human readable. It's good and easy, and it can be fast, but there is, again, like every library, easy to learn, hard to master. So yeah, thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and have a nice day. Bye.